So they say civil engineers cause all the problems, right? So I'm here to apologize. One of the things that I'd like to do, and I greatly appreciate the previous speaker's insights, and I think one of the things that's going to be fun is kind of shifting scale. So I'm going global. I just would like to remind everybody about what exactly climate change is all about, right? We are an incredibly rare planet that actually has an atmosphere, and that atmosphere protects us from the sun's rays, because if we didn't have that atmosphere, we would be fried and it would look like Mars. And so we have this lovely atmosphere. Unfortunately, what we're doing in the process of increasing the CO2 and the other greenhouse gas elements, it's like we're shutting all of the windows in a greenhouse. And if you've ever been in a greenhouse in the summertime when the windows are shut, it starts getting really hot, and then it gets really damp, and then the plants start wilting. So that's what I want you to think about, right? So when we think about climate change, it's nice to think about it in a global context, right? It's not weather. It means that we're slowly shutting all of the windows in that greenhouse in the middle of the summer in the sun. So what we see, and some of my colleagues, the previous speakers, also talked about this global temperature. But what we see when we have the global temperature changes is that everything goes into extremes, right? Some people say, "Oh, I don't mind global warming, right? Because it'll save on my heating bill." But what happens is, what we're seeing is that everything moves to extremes. The colds get colder, the hots get hotter, the rains get harder, the droughts get longer, right? So what we're doing is it's like an out of control swing, where we're just swinging wildly back and forth. And this is where it manifests in weather, but weather is not climate change. So when we start thinking about the Earth, there's a great editorial today, I think in the New York Times, that the planet will survive, but humans may not, right? And I happen to believe that I think humans have a unique role in helping the whole world move forward, right? So I think it would be kind of nice if humans would survive. So that's what I'm interested in doing. So one of the things I do a lot of work with is governments and community groups. And really the whole role of a community is to enhance the health, safety, and well-being of all of its members. That's why people live in communities. And it also enables the economic exchange processes that we call commerce. And we've been doing it under constant changes, right? So how many people remember the economic downturn of 2008, right? So, there was those economic changes, there are social changes, there are, and then there are environmental changes. And what we can also think about is changes in the built systems themselves. So in the Mystic River, in the Alewife and Mystic River corridor, because as many of my co-speakers mentioned, these flow into the Mystic River and are part of the whole Mystic River watershed. Huron Avenue is actually the glacial moraine that divides the Charles River watershed from the Mystic River watershed, right? So as you're standing there on Huron Ave, you have a glass of water and you pour it. Which side of the Huron Ave depends on which one of the watersheds you're going towards. So these are all of the critical elements that are in that whole corridor. Part of the reason that there's so many people there is because there's so much wonderful stuff there, right? So Fresh Pond, the Alewife Brook, the Little River, the Mystic River itself, the Mystic Lakes. So what we do as humans, we tend to gather where the good stuff is, and then we build all our stuff right there, right? So firehouses and police stations and hospitals and schools. So what we've got is all of these things that everybody always thinks about. What I do as a civil engineer and as a systems engineer is all of the stuff below ground that nobody ever thinks about. The water and sewer, the gas pipelines, the electrical lines, the communications. So as we like to say, we're the ones that nobody ever thinks about until things don't work anymore, right? So if you've ever woken up in the morning and you turn on your faucet and it doesn't work, then you call DPW, right? That's civil engineers. So, but one of the things that's interesting is that we start thinking about the Mystic River, right? So here's Fresh Pond down here, right? And then that's the Mystic River. So this is the approximate path in my little rough outline of the arc of the Alewife Brook Parkway. Is what most people don't realize is that it used to be this lovely meandering brook. As Eric mentioned, it was a fishing weir. There were fishing weirs that the local Native American communities used, and they would catch all those lovely little alewives. And so when the industry, including the brickyards came in and the railroads came in, they thought, well, this thing kind of wanders all over the place. You know, the Alewife Brook wanders, and so we're going to straighten it out. And as long as we're straightening it out, we might as well put some water pipes right next to it. And then as long as we put the water pipes next to it, we might put the sewer pipes there too. And by the way, let's put the road. And now that we've got all this stuff here, we might as well put the gas mains. We might as well put the communication mains. And we might as well put the major electrical feeds. So what happens is all of that critical infrastructure for the whole Boston metropolitan area runs along that corridor. So discussions that I had with some colleagues, and I said, well, clearly from these analyses that are going to be done, it's already flooding, and it's going to increase in flooding in that particular corridor as we get more extreme rain surges, right? So this is not even talking about sea level rise. So particularly when we start talking about sea level rise, the salt water comes in, and brackish water is really bad for metal, right? So if you've ever, hung out down next to the ocean, and you start noticing that all the metal deteriorates really quickly, imagine all of your critical infrastructure systems sitting underground in salty water and how quickly they start to degrade. And so I said, well, we're going to have to start dealing with this. And they said, well, we can't, because everything is together. And I said, well, this is that particular area under 5 feet of sea level rise, right? So you may have already seen the elements for the rain, but when we start looking at sea level rise, we're talking about a lot of brackish water that's over that whole particular area. And 10 feet of sea level rise gives us a number of little island hills and isthmuses, and it's going to be very different in the whole Boston metropolitan area. And what we're seeing is that we're continuing, and this is something that Ellen mentioned, we're continuing to put things exactly where we know they flood. And it's insane. And it makes it dangerous for the people who are living there, and it means that everybody who buys anything there is now at risk of losing all of their investment. So all of those condos and all the rest of it, it's not fair that these people that everybody doesn't know that this is going on. So this was a briefing that I gave at the state legislature. And so really saying, okay, look, you've got to deal with this. You've got to recognize that this particular corridor not only has the wonderful natural assets, but has critical infrastructure assets. And if those assets are damaged, then major portions of the whole Boston metropolitan area will not have fresh water. Right? If those of you remember when the main pipe that comes in from Quabbin broke, it may not have sewage treatment, right? Because if these systems get contaminated, it may not have power, you may not have gas, you may not have communications, and of course all of these are major transportation hubs as well. So what I want to do is focus on how do we actually recognize the fact that these changes are going to happen, even if magically we could, stop any CO2 and other greenhouse gas emissions immediately. There's still enough built up into the system so that there's a whole bunch of momentum happening, right? Eventually, the systems will kind of reconfigure and it can come back down if we could magically stop some of the greenhouse gases. But what we also need to do is plan for those changes. So we know there are going to be plans and changes in social systems and environmental systems, and we can change our built systems to accommodate those changes. And what we can think about is changes that are not only an acute shock, like an earthquake or the volcano on the Great Island, on the Big Island in Hawaii, but also chronic disruptors, right? So when we start talking about urban heat island effect, we're talking about heat waves, where people who have compromised health conditions get sicker and sicker and sicker, and there's no relief, right? Days and days and days and weeks. So just to mention, the Massachusetts Emergency Management Association and the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs in the state are coming up with this, what's supposed to be an integrated hazard mitigation and climate adaptation plan. They have not talked to any communities. They are only talking to the state agencies. So this was why I was telling the state legislators that the audience involved in this. So what I would like to propose is really thinking about things we've already seen in our area. So the Charles River Natural Valley Storage Area was created by the Army Corps of Engineers because there was horrific floods during the 50s and 60s that caused tens of people to be killed, hundreds to be injured, and massive amounts of property damage all the way down the Charles River. So what they did is they basically bought up over 8,000 acres. And if you ever get a chance to go canoeing up there, it is absolutely spectacular. You can put in a canoe anywhere and canoe around for hours. I was up there with my husband for about 6 hours. It was just gorgeous. And what it does is it holds all that water. So when there's a massive rain event, that area actually holds it and then can release it gradually down the Charles River so it doesn't flood. So I want us to reconfigure the whole Great Swamp that Eric had in his element and think about that whole area and reestablishing it, and also relocating all of those infrastructure assets, doing both decentralized systems as well as locating those assets that have to be continuous in other areas, and then using that area to reestablish the riverine systems and all of the natural systems that then can protect everybody. The Great Swamp, I will note, is important not just for Cambridge, but for everybody downstream and for the whole Mystic River watershed. So this is why in many ways it's not just Cambridge's problem. It is a problem for everybody in the whole watershed. People will die if we don't do something like this. And as a civil engineer, anything we build, we can unbuild. Thank you.